Well, it seems like now really what dominates the media for the Ukraine-Russian conflict is all this chatter about the North Korean troops, and
Yeah, that's
Biden
really
is
funny.
talking, right? So,
It's
but
just really bizarre. I say, who knows? But I don't see any reason why the North Koreans would fight, and so I would be very, very surprised if they actually are, if they enter combat anywhere. And you see these reports. Actually, they've gone beyond like they're already fighting, and they've already been like North Korean troop concentrations have been hit by Ukrainian missiles. Actually, some North Koreans have already defected to the Ukrainian side. Again, there's absolutely no evidence for any of this. It becomes this really elaborate story that keeps on spreading. It's just really funny. But and you see it in all kinds of media, Western media. But I think it's all coming from Ukraine. Ukraine's just spoon feeding this wild fantasy, and they're repeating it. But if you look at like the statements that the Pentagon makes, they're much more careful, and they'll say, yeah, we have intelligence that there are North Koreans in Russia, but we don't have any intelligence that they're going to Kursk or Ukraine. And of course, we too have intelligence that there are North Koreans in Russia.
right.
Your sister, saw some North Korean soldiers there on the metro. Yeah, but big deal. So what? They're allies. Of course, you're going to see North Koreans in Russia. But this whole thing, it just seems to be an elaborate fantasy, and I wonder how long it's going to go. There have been fantasies that the Ukrainians have cooked up in the past, but they usually last maybe at the most a week. This one just keeps on getting more elaborate. Is it going to start? They're going to start talking about actual battles and paratroopers, North Korean paratroopers, and being surrounded and whatever, and just
Right.
I don't know. I don't know how far they're going to take this.
Right. I just found it very interesting because, like you said, North Korea and Russia have a mutual defense treaty. It
Right.
just makes sense that you'll see military personnel from Russia in North Korea and military personnel from North Korea in Russia. It's just part of the defense treaty. I mean, America,
Right.
we have military presence in over in like 100 countries, right? So it's
Right.
So
Yeah.
what's the obsession? Why is this Western media obsession over North Korea? Is it just well? I'll just let you take it from there.
Well, yeah, part of it is, Ukraine is always just kind of, I think Ukraine is getting desperate, and they're just kind of, Zelensky's victory plan just it was a total abject failure, right? It fell completely flat. And they know that they're losing. And so they're just going kind of from one wild scheme to another. He said, well, maybe if we can convince them that the North Koreans are fighting, that'll get them, riled up, and they'll send some of their own troops. I think it's something like that. And so, again, it's just that when we have our Western media just faithfully reports anything that the Ukrainians tell them. I mean, you just get, I continue to follow like the mainstream, let's say kind of, the kind of Western media that I think the average consumer of news in the West consumes. And it's all along, in spite of the obvious Russian victories and the obvious fact that the Russians are winning, it continues to be about amazing deeds by Ukrainians and stupid, savage, orcish Russians. And this is just another, kind of a particularly wild manifestation of that.
Well, why do you think Western leaders, European leaders, are so reluctant to engage in diplomacy with with Russia? I mean, it seems like they seem terrified of the prospect of negotiating a peace settlement, when really clearly the most terrifying prospect is having NATO troops enter into a conflict with Russia. That's the truly terrifying thing. But it seems like that's the line that most Western leaders are going down, instead of the much more pragmatic, realistic, and less terrifying, not the nuclear option of let's have peace talks. Let's save as many Ukrainian lives as we can. I mean, Ukraine has been destroyed. Why?
Yeah. Well, again, it's just that they're irrational, they're deluded. In particular, to be more specific, they've demonized Russia and especially President Putin to such an extent that they can't talk with him. How can you talk with the devil? And they've made him out to be Hitler. The whole thing is completely absurd. And, say you can't negotiate with Hitler. The only thing he understands is force. I watched an interview, I guess it was on the Duran, with George Beebe, who was a former Russia's analyst in the U.S. government, very, very high level, very smart guy. And he was saying that, in the like 99% of conflicts, the best way to deal with them is through diplomacy. And you always can come to some kind of solution. It's just there's one exception to that. It's when you have a truly expansionist power that's just hell bent on seizing territory. And he gave it as an example. It's overused, but it's true as far as it goes. Nazi Germany again, Nazi Germany wasn't interested in the West, but they were interested in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. They wanted to seize those territories, and I think they really were hell-bent on doing that. And so that's always brought up, and it's applied to Russia, for example. But it just does not. I mean, it's a false application. I mean, Russia is not that power. Russia wanted to negotiate. It's just clear for anybody who looks into the history. They were trying to negotiate. They were not that expansionist power. They did not, even when the Donbass, back in 2014, actually just kind of begged Russia to take them in and make them part of Russia. Putin refused. He wanted to negotiate with the West. But that's the model that they have in their heads, and they made Putin out to be Hitler, and it's just a completely false model. It's a delusion, but it means that they can't make rational decisions. In the end, I think the whole thing will fall apart because it is so utterly false. At some point, unless they do something really, really stupid and actually do send lots of troops Western troops into Ukraine. It will fall apart. And then who knows, hopefully, I hope they just sober up or, realistic parties come to power. And again, I think there's reasons to be very hopeful, to be somewhat hopeful in Europe, more so than in the U.S. Again, because we do find other parties that are coming to power or, are threatening or actually have won elections, but because of, again, the shenanigans by the establishment have not actually been able to take power, but eventually they may take power, and that would be good news. And just on that particular subject, I wanted to add some interesting information that I found recently. I was saying that an unfortunate aspect of these, let's say, dissident anti-globalist parties is that the ones on the right, like National Rally in France or the AfD and in Germany, tend to also be very Zionist. But I said I felt that was kind of a shallow Zionism. It was just sort of more of a political tactic than anything. It's not like what you find in the U.S. And then I saw a poll came out recently that showed a dramatic shift actually within the AfD membership in their attitudes towards Israel. And now it's like only 19% are firm supporters of Israel. So within it's really AfD itself. Within the AfD. And there's also, it's not just them, but there was a leader of the AfD was saying that, we need to distance ourselves from Israel. So that's good news. So again, I think there's reasons to be, you see signs of actual rationality not within the establishment, but that establishment, and to a great extent, has actually kind of sold their souls to the U.S. But those groups, those political parties within Europe that have not sold their souls to the U.S. are showing that they are rational and they can, and if they do come to power, I think we have, and they could, especially when this Ukraine project just ends in total undeniable disaster, they could really come to power, and we could see a new Europe. I hope so. I have some optimism there.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Yeah, I hope so. It seems like leaders that have tied themselves to the United States are being punished severely in Europe, and hopefully the democratic institutions that we praise so much here in the West will actually hold and work, and then we can see a real change.
The establishment is really fighting against democracy there, but they may lose, and this may be.
Well, they got to do that to save democracy, Dad.
Yeah,
you understand, right? That's how it works.
Right.